Now available in paperback and e-readers. E-Steam Horror of a Hyena Woman. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a wicked werewolf in this action-packed all-new E-Steam series adventure. Get E-Steam Horror of a Hyena Woman in paperback and e-readers today. In 2018, I moved out of a Section 8 apartment complex, 1294 Grant Avenue and 1295 Morris Avenue. And I had lived in that building for over 30 years, and it seems like the apartment complex has gotten worse since I left back in 2018. Now, there's an old saying that you can't go home again, and after watching this news clip, it's clear that you don't want to go back home to this building because things have changed so much for the worse. And I'm going to show you how bad it has gotten in this clip from Eyewitness News. This clip is used under fair use of copyright law of 1976 and is part of my commentary.
Now to an Eyewitness News exclusive. They say they are living in fear, terrorized by a group of kids that comes to their building in the Bronx night after night. And these senior citizens say it's gotten so bad, they're afraid to come out after dark. Eyewitness News reporter Lucy Yang has the story from the Morrisania section.
Look in my eyes. I have not slept.
67-year-old Miriam Cintron and her neighbors live in a state of fear. They claim large gangs of young teens have been terrorizing their apartment building in the Bronx all summer, and it's getting worse.
They came at us. They beat us. They broke that stick from that tree there to beat us with the wood. We don't have nobody.
Miriam says they broke the pole from the tree well and turned it into a weapon Saturday night as she fell victim to their violence.
They were kicking me in my side. They were kicking me on this side. They was punching me in my back, trying to get my face, but I covered.
63-year-old Nydia Carrero says a group of young girls the same night slammed her to the sidewalk, dragged her and pummeled her after she refused them entry into her building.
They wanted to hang out in the hallway and smoke pot and mess up the building. They go in there with bikes in there half the time.
This is 1294 and 1295 East 169th Street in the Morrisania section of the Bronx. Most of the tenants here are elderly. They tell me they are being swarmed, beaten, and robbed by ruthless teens who have turned their apartment building into an oasis of lawlessness and who apparently count on their youth to spare them. As the adolescents escalate the violence night after night, residents are left bruised and traumatized.
It's a shame. And they are telling us they're going to come back and burn the building down. It's ridiculous.
Many tenants have lived here for decades and they take care of each other, but they concede they are no match for this nightmare, which has claimed their peace.
Now, according to news reports on ABC7 and CBS2 News, there are bands of teenagers terrorizing tenants in the building I used to live in, 1294 Grant Avenue, and the companion building, 1295 Morris Avenue. Now, in the reports, they are trying to say that the address is 1294 and 1295 East 169th Street. However, the actual address is 1294 Grant Avenue and 1295 Morris Avenue. And these reports are saying that there are mobs of teenagers who are terrorizing people in the building, and they are attacking people outside of the building in the nearby Grant Park. And I find that to be quite troubling because when I lived in that building up to 2018, that building was fairly safe because that building had security devices such as you needed a key fob to get into the building, and you also, before that, needed to buzz to get in, so the building was fairly safe. Moreover, you had the tenants who were mostly elderly and people who had families, and this building was primarily meant for people with disabilities because my sister who passed away had a disability. So The only people who were allowed in the building were people who had disabilities. So the only people who could get apartments in that building were elderly and people who were disabled. However, that criteria changed, and that changing of the criteria is probably one of the reasons why the neighborhood has a problem with crime right now. Now, what reporters won't tell you about that neighborhood is that, one, we got a homeless shelter that was built right next to the Solara complex up the hill, and they also won't tell you that there were major policy changes as related to who got into that building. Because, again, before 2015 or so, this building was primarily a housing unit for the elderly and the disabled. However, those policies changed due to the Obama administration changing the policies for Section 8. Now, back in 2014 or 2015, the Obama administration changed the policies for Section 8, and they made a new set of criteria as related to how grants were being made. And what the landlord for that building did was they went out here and sold the building from the Morrisania Associates to an owner who created this progressive management, and they went out here and got grant money and tax credits to basically renovate the building by going out here and putting in new appliances, putting in new kitchens, putting in new bathrooms, all while the tenants were still there. And as they were putting in these renovations, they went out here and tried to recertify most of the tenants. And as they were working to so-called recertify many of the tenants, they went out here and filed papers in housing court to try to evict many of those tenants. Now, as they were out here filing papers in housing court, they were driving many of the older, elderly, and disabled tenants out of the building, and they drove all of those elderly and disabled tenants out of the neighborhood of Morrisania, and then they replaced them with many of these new people who were mostly immigrants. And as they replaced them with immigrants, we got a lot of young teenagers who came into the neighborhood. Now, this band of teenagers were primarily usually either African immigrants or Hispanic immigrants, and they took over the neighborhood, and I began to see these roaming groups of mobs of teenagers as far back as 2018. Now, I used to go up the hill from Grant Avenue to the Grand Concourse to pick up my family member as she got off of work, to walk her home to make sure she was safe. And as I was going out to help her come home, what I would see are these bands of teenagers who would be just roaming around 7 o'clock. So I would go out at 7 o'clock to go pick up my family member off the bus. And as I was going up the hill, I would go by the shell of Grant Park because they had closed up Grant Park to renovate it. And what I would see would be these roaming bands of teenagers, and they would just be roaming around, just these African kids who would just be roaming around because there was no family unit there to give these children structure. Because what I've heard from some people in African communities is that they allow their children to just roam around, and what they're doing is they would roam around the neighborhood, and then some would be roaming around and going into different buildings, standing around and just hanging out there. And since there was nobody there to clear these individuals out, they would just be there. So this is what I saw back as far as 2018, and it looks like it has possibly gotten worse over the last 5 years. So what's happening now in the aftermath of 5 years of just bringing in many of these new kinds of tenants, what they have done is they have brought down the quality of life in that neighborhood, and they have gone out here and made it where many of the tenants there are just not living and feeling safe in their own building. And that is primarily the fault of the management, because the management wanted to go out here and get this money from the Obama administration, from these grants, and they wanted to go out here and get their apartments renovated. And they traded off safety for trying to get this money. They ran off all of the tenants who basically were keeping the neighborhood safe, and they brought down the quality of life by bringing in the African version of Pookie and Ray Ray and the Hispanic version of Pookie and Ray Ray. And these individuals, because they have no family structure, they're just running wild, and they're basically tearing up the neighborhood, and they're invading many of these secure spaces like the vestibules of these apartment buildings that like I lived in, and going into the stairs, again attacking people. And they're attacking people because they just have again no family unit, no family structure, and they're just going and wreaking havoc all over the place. So this was all a result of management going out here and forcing out the tenants like my family and others, and they want to sit there and make it look like, oh, they don't understand where these kids came from. Well, another Facebook friend, he tells me that a lot of them come from Sheridan Avenue, which is the avenue up the hill from Grant Avenue. And many of these people, they do come from Sheridan Avenue, but they also come from other buildings in the area, because the progressive management, they went out here and brought these individuals in, and as they brought them in, hoping to get a big payday, the neighborhood is paying because they are not doing a good job of doing good background checks. And that was something I saw back as far as 2008, when the person who was living next to me when I was working at CUNY, they brought this guy in, and all he would do is play his radio super loud. So they don't do a good job of vetting people and checking backgrounds, I believe, at progressive management. And because they don't do a good job of vetting and doing background checks, this is why their quality of life in the neighborhood has declined, because they brought these people into this neighborhood, and they're just terrorizing people. And again, this is something I saw as far back as 2008, and the situation has gotten worse since 2015, when they put money over people. And over the course of the pandemic, we've seen that because we have these lockdowns, there is no structure, and this is why you have gangs terrorizing elderly people in that building, because the managers there didn't do a good job of checking backgrounds and vetting people like they did back in 1988 when my family moved into this building. So this whole story, they're talking about they don't understand where all the crime is coming from. No, the crime is coming because of white leftist greed, and white leftist greed is the main reason this neighborhood has deteriorated, and they just don't want to admit that their policies are a reason why the neighborhood has fallen completely apart. Because all of that again, back as far as 2016 and 2017, that neighborhood was still fairly safe. And I used to go out here and I would walk 9 blocks to go to the library as I was on my quest to look for a job. And as I was trying to build up this YouTube channel, I would walk 9 blocks all the way to the Morrisania branch of the library. And it was fairly safe to walk down that street. But now I'm hearing that you can't even walk down that street because the gangs and the criminals have basically taken it over. And the library over there, the Morrisania branch of the library, has basically become a place where a lot of, even far as 2018, had become a place where heroin addicts were basically using it to nod. So the quality of life has dropped, and one of the reasons is because the landlords there wanted to get fast money from those grants, and they wanted to get their apartments renovated. But when their renovation, they tore down the quality of life in that community, and it was really sad to see that happen before I left, because I could see the seeds coming. Even one of my other family members, he went and called my mother one morning and said, or afternoon, and said to her, hey, you got to watch out for yourself when you're going out here, because he one time came down and saw those bands of kids as far back as 2017 and 2018, and he called my mom and he said, hey, watch out for yourself, this neighborhood's getting really bad, because he saw those bands of kids just wandering around. And again, this is all due to the complete collapse of the family unit, the complete collapse of the family structure, and the complete failure of leadership in this management company, which sent out a BS statement saying, oh, we don't tolerate this, but you allowed these individuals to come into your building, and you allowed them to come in because of greed. And the main reason why these individuals are here is because you didn't want the tenants that you had. You thought you could get better tenants, because at this time there was a big trend as related to people moving to New York. It was these hipsters and all these other individuals, and they thought, oh, we'll force all of these old tenants out to get these white hipsters. But those white hipsters had no interest in coming to the Bronx, and then they brought in all of these African immigrants and other Dominicans, and what happened was they came in with these adolescents and young teens, and again, there was no family structure, there was no order, and you got the chaos you got right now. So I was deeply saddened to hear about what happened to my old neighborhood and my old building, and it sadly proves a statement a writer made many years ago, that you can't go home, because what happens is that time passes and your neighborhood changes, the people change in that neighborhood, so it's not the same as the neighborhood you knew growing up. And that was just sad to see things deteriorate in that neighborhood, because my mother tells me that there were people in the neighborhood who said this neighborhood was really bad as we first came there in 1988, and it seems like the cycle has come back around, and the neighborhood has turned right back into what it was before. So it was really sad to see that things changed right back into what it was before, and it was sad to see that a neighborhood that was fairly decent and was a place where I lived to graduate high school, where I lived to graduate college, a place where I lived as I was getting my first job working at the Food Emporium, and a place where I worked at AmeriCorps and the City College of New York, a residence that I lived in for 30 years. It was sad to see that this neighborhood, which was a fairly decent and okay place to live, a place where you could get into Manhattan in less than 30 minutes, a really great place as related to shops and transportation. It's sad to see this neighborhood fall apart like this, but again, it's sad to see this, but a lot of the people in the news, they want to say that it's just the young gangs, but we wouldn't have a problem with the young gangs if it wasn't for the old management and their greed. So I wanted to give people more of a perspective on what was going on as related to why that neighborhood has gotten so bad. And I wanted to give you a story from a resident's perspective and somebody on the ground, so that you can understand what really is the main reason why the neighborhood went to crap. And the main reason is because when you have the wrong person managing a property, they don't understand that you have to have the right people in the neighborhood to have a good quality of life. Now, this was a video I just wanted to make because I lived in that building for over 30 years, and I just wanted to give people, again, more perspective on the things going on the ground that you're not going to get on the news. So I'm hoping this gives you some perspective on things. I hope it gives you some understanding of what goes on in ghetto neighborhoods like Morrisania, and I hope that it gives you an understanding of why it's hard to build in these neighborhoods, because you not only have the people on the street trying to tear you down, you also have people in these Section 8 management also trying to tear you down as well. So if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, you may do so as well by going over to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, the Beauty Myth. Learn the beauty secrets of the goddess next door in this action-packed ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, the Beauty Myth at online booksellers everywhere today.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere.